the title of today's message is Be a Positive Person. Everybody say positive. Positive. Be a positive person. Key passage is Philippians chapter 2, verse 5. So, we have a choice. Last night we had some youth here, our Saturday night youth group. We talked about choices. Choices. You know, so many things in life are choices. You can't always control your circumstances. You can't always control the things that happen to you. But I want to tell you, about 2% of life is what happens to you, and about 98% of life is how you respond to what happens to you. That's choices. And I think a lot of times it starts with our attitude. So positive or negative, does it matter? Does it really matter? Does it really matter if you're a positive person or if you're a negative person? You know, we got all kinds of people in the world, and most of the time, I like diversity. I like diversity. You know, there's black people, and there's white people, there's Hispanic people, there's Asian people, there's tall people and short people, fat people, skinny people. There's just all kinds of people in the world, and it's nice to have diversity. But what about positive people and negative people? Shouldn't we have some of both? You know, I think it's a little different there. Most people would rather be around positive people. Even pessimists, I find, even pessimists, even people that are just generally negative are for some reason drawn to positive people. Even pessimists like to be around positive people, although when they get there, they usually try. It usually sometimes seems to be a contest to see if they can get them to see their negative point of view. But positive people lift other people up. Positive people bring other people up who are down. Positive people are usually more fun to be around. Most people don't enjoy being around pessimists. Positive people generally cause more positiveness to happen. And although most people would agree with this, many people don't realize that it really has everything to do with choice and very little to do with circumstance. Your state of mind has very, very little to do with your circumstances. It has very little to do with what you've been through. It has very little to do with what your family's been through, with your education or your social status or your economic status. It has everything to do with choice. So choose to be a positive person. We can choose, and that's the point of today's message, we can choose to be a positive person. And I want to give you here today some practical steps, some practical biblical steps. Certainly not an all-inclusive list. There are certainly other ways, but a few practical steps on how we can be a positive person. Now, it starts in your mind. How many of you agree with that? Whether you're going to be a positive person or a negative person, your outlook starts in your mind. So many people, I've met some people who just, to tell you, it just seems like, and I know they didn't do this on purpose, but it just seems like they've made up their minds to be unhappy, to be negative. And some folks, not talking about anybody in this room, but some folks I know have just, it's just, no matter what good happens, you could be right in the middle of the most wonderful blessings. It can be raining money, and they'll find something wrong with the situation and somehow be unhappy. And the reason for that is it's not because they want to be like that, but because the battle started in their mind long ago. Your mind can get trained to see negative things, to feel negative things, to relive past hurts, to expect bad things to happen again because they happened before. But as with so many things in life, the battle begins in our mind. So if we think it's better to be a positive person than a negative person, then let's start the battle in our mind. Let's start examining our mind and seeing, take an assessment. If I was going to try to get my budget under control, if I didn't have enough money to buy the things that I needed, and I wasn't able to pay my bills, well, the first thing I would do is I'd make an assessment. I'd get a list, tally up a list of what I owe, and tally up a list of what I have. We'd get an assessment. We try to figure out where we're at. So we need to do that in our mind, maybe. Maybe we need to take an assessment of ourselves. Am I a positive person or am I a negative person? I've got to check myself ever so often, because just because I was a positive person 10 years ago, I find myself over the years, I sometimes allow circumstances to begin to change my state of mind. I've caught myself doing that a few times over the last few decades. But if we have periods of regularly checking our state of mind, just like if you check your bank account and you run a little dry, well, you might need to start putting a little more in there. If I check my state of mind and it seems a little dark, I need to put a little more light in there. So we start with our state of mind if you want to be a positive person, because thoughts matter. It matters what you're thinking. Thoughts is a lesson I teach with the kids. I won't teach the whole lesson now, but I'll tell you the bullet points on it are about thoughts, how thoughts lead to actions. They do. You think about something long enough, you'll end up doing something related to that thought if you keep repeating it long enough. Thoughts lead to actions, but actions lead to habits. You take actions enough, that'll become your habit. And habits lead to character. And character leads to destiny, positive or negative. So one way that we can overcome that and become a positive person is to consider our mind, our thoughts. The Bible tells us, Philippians chapter 2, that we should let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. That's the best way to start checking my state of mind. Let's check and consider if my state of mind is like Jesus' state of mind. How many of you think Jesus was a positive person or a negative person? How many of you think he was positive? Most of us, I think Jesus was a positive person. Of course, he said he wasn't afraid to point out the negative things around him. He wasn't afraid to confront negative issues when he saw them. But as he confronted the negative issues, as he dealt with the negative things, he always had a positive outlook. He always led people to the light. He didn't just cast darkness on it, but he led people to the light. We need to let this mind be in us, which was also in Christ Jesus. He didn't get bogged down by his circumstances so that he was unable to do any good. So it begins with, I'm going to give you 5 steps. Step 1, think positive thoughts. Everybody say, think good things. Think good things. Spoke a little bit about this last week. We talked about, as we were talking about, the title of last week's message was to be careful for nothing. And one of the ways that Paul gave us to do that was to think good things. If you want to be a positive person, you really do have to have positive thoughts. You really do. Some people say, well, I can't help it. You don't know my circumstances. I want to tell you, the worse your circumstances are, the more important it is for you to take responsibility for your thoughts and think some good things. The worse your circumstances are, the more likely it is, that you could slide down that slippery slope. If I'm driving on a straight 4-lane highway and there's no other cars around and it's well lit, it's in the middle of the day, and I might be able to get away with checking my text messages a few times, even though I shouldn't do that. But if I'm in the middle of a blizzard and there's cars on every side and the road's a sheet of ice and the salt trucks haven't been out yet, that's probably not a good time to check my text messages. It could get really dangerous there. Well, it's the same way with your thoughts. If you're already in the middle of a storm, you better be careful how you're thinking. Think good things, even when they're in the middle trying situations. You say, well, Pastor, you just don't know. Well, we've got a lot of examples in the Bible. I was reading through the Bible. I was looking at the book of Lamentations. Lamentations is one of the saddest books in the Bible, I think. If you want to, I want to tell you, if you're having a down day and you want to get downer, Lamentations. Jeremiah was lamenting over the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of his country, God's city. My Lord, this place that God had established, and for hundreds of years it had stood, kings, generation after generation. But God had sent prophets to warn them that they would fall if they didn't turn back to him, and they finally did. And the Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came and they utterly destroyed Jerusalem. They broke down its walls. They destroyed the temple. They carried away the nobles and the people captive, and the city was left in ruins. And Jeremiah was lamenting over that. He was recording it. And in the middle of that, in the middle of him noticing how bad everything is, in the middle of the worst of his sorrow and his tears, Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, there in chapter 3 of Lamentations, he wrote these words. He said, when I'm looking at all this, I've got to remember this one thing, that it's because of the Lord's mercy that we are not consumed, because his mercies are renewed every morning. His compassions, they fail not. Great is his faithfulness. Right in the middle of this, that's where the song, we get that song, great is thy faithfulness. Because Jeremiah, right in the middle of all of this junk, he took time to remember, wait a minute. So if all you can see around you is negative, be glad you can see. Really. If you're having a really bad day, if everything in your life stinks, be glad you can smell. You're still here. You're still alive. That's what Jeremiah said. He said, I'm looking at all this destruction, but I got to stop and remember it's because of God's mercy that I'm still here to look at all this destruction. There's still some of us left. There's still a remnant. His mercies are renewed every day. His compassion won't fail. He's going to make it okay. And he begins to write about the hope that he has for the future. Even on the worst day, we can still find something positive to look to. That's true. We've got all kinds of examples set before us. We have the examples that Jesus set, the example of Stephen that he set, the examples that Paul set. We can choose to think on these things. Philippians chapter 4, we read last week. I'll read it again because it bears remembering. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of a good report, whatever things, if there is any virtue, if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. Meditate on them. You know, some Christians fail to discipline their thinking. They allow negatives to dominate their minds. You know, discipline's not a dirty word. And discipline doesn't mean punishment. Discipline means to determine to follow a set course, a set habit, a set pattern. We can discipline our minds, and we can choose to stop our stinking thinking. Christians must take deliberate action, replacing negative thoughts with positive thoughts and keeping an optimistic outlook. If you want to lead a victorious Christian life, you know, God promised you good things. Jesus constantly calls us to remember, to expect good things. Even when he was about to be crucified, he said, I'm going to prepare a place for you. He said, don't be troubled. Don't be afraid. I'm going to prepare a place for you. If I go and prepare a place, I'll come again to receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. He said, in my Father's house, there's many mansions. He encouraged us to think on these good things. Have you ever been flipping through the channels at a remote control, flipping through the channels, not sure what you're going to watch, just flipping through the channels, and then you pause on a channel for a minute, you pause on another channel for a minute, you pause on another channel. We've all done that, right? You ever pause on a channel and you just start watching something and you're like, this is terrible. Anybody ever done that? Like, why would anybody watch this? This is horrible. What do you do when that happens? Change the channel. Well, sometimes we flip through the channels in our minds and we find something that's terrible, something that's painful, something that's regretful, and we just go ahead and leave it on that channel. Change the channel. Just change the channel. That's really all you got to do, just change the channel. I have to choose to do that. No one else has the remote control of my mind but me. No one else can change the channels in my mind but me. You're on a channel you don't like, change the channel. That's what I do when I'm flipping through the channels. Looking for something to watch. Well, I don't want to watch that. I don't want to watch that. Find something positive. There may be 100 channels. This is true too. When I'm doing that, I remember, how many of you are old enough to remember, I had to use the word old in there. I remember back when we only had 3 main channels, just 3. Then they had an independent channel that came in, and then we had a couple of them. You could watch PBS if you want, so we were up to about 6 channels. We thought that was a lot of choices. Man, you got like 200 choices now. There's just so many choices of stuff to watch. And there may be 500 bad choices, but you can usually find 1 or 2. You can only watch 1 at a time anyway. It doesn't matter if there's 100 negative channels. If you can find 1 to settle on that's good, you can do that in your mind. It doesn't matter if you've got 1,000 bad memories that you can allow to dominate your mind. I'm sure you can find a couple good ones. He said, think on these things. Think on these good things. Now, before I go on, of course, I don't mean that we never think about the negative situations and problems that life presents us with. Every time I preach a message, it's not more than a couple weeks, somebody tries to remind me, take me to an extreme on one side or another. Well, you said never think negative things. Now here you are talking about, the fact that I don't mean that. We need to guard against extremism. People can take things to the extremes on either side, and then it's hard to function in life. So of course I don't mean that we don't deal with negative situations when they come up. I don't mean that we don't ask for help if we need a helping hand. You can't ask for that because that would be negative. You can't tell people what you're going through. Of course you can. But for what end? For what purpose? Well, consider Jesus, for example. Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and while he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he was in anguish. He was in travail. He was praying, and he was in agony, so that his sweat was as it were great drops of blood. So I'm not saying, I don't think he was saying, ooh, yippity-yay, yippity-yay, get to go to the cross, hallelujah. No, the Lord sent angels to comfort him, to strengthen him. But see, Jesus was looking forward to an event that he knew was going to happen and that it was going to be difficult. And he was greatly concerned about that. And you may have some things that you're going through and you're greatly concerned. And I mean, if you walked into, a hospital room and you start skipping around the room and saying, oh, yippee-yay, yippee-yay, we got some cancer, people are going to think you're crazy. Of course, there's a time to be serious. And there's a time to be sorrowful. The Bible says that we need to mourn with those who mourn. Rejoice with those who rejoice. There's time. So we've got to avoid extremes. But I want to tell you what Jesus wasn't doing. A week later, when he was meeting with his disciples, he wasn't still in agony saying, you just don't know how bad it hurt. No, he said, hey, I've overcome. and I'm with you always. When his disciples came to him again, when he came to them in the upper room, and they said, Master, Thomas said, my Lord and my God. He didn't say, get away from me. You rejected me once. You'll probably do it again. I'm never going down that road again. Never going down that road again. No, hurt too bad. Everybody was cussing me when I was up there on the cross. He didn't do that. Neither should we. Yesterday ended last night. Nowhere can I find people going back into past hurts and being negative. Or nowhere do we find Jesus doing that. So yeah, he dealt with the things. He criticized the Pharisees when they were in the middle of being Pharisees. Paul criticized the Judaizers. But they didn't lament continually over negative things. He did these things, dealt with these things in order to bring people back to a positive outlook, to an expectation of good. We have that expectation. So we might have gone through some things, and we might need to remember some of the things that we've gone through in order to keep us from making errors again. But going to the cross wasn't an error for Jesus, so there's no sense reliving the pain, expecting bad out of people just because everybody abandoned him. Why would he go ahead and come right back to the disciples? But he did, and to you, and to me. So, talking about thinking here. There's a difference between being responsible enough to make plans, face trials thoughtfully and prudently, and just being negative all the time. There's a difference. And we need to be wise enough and have enough common sense to recognize the difference. We shouldn't be thinking about past hurts for no reason, future fears without purpose, such things like that. So the first step is to think positive thoughts. The second step, we need to hear positive sounds. So it starts with our mind. If the battle starts in our mind, and we want to win the battle in our mind, then we need, as much as we can, to put some limits on what comes into our mind. One of the first ways things comes into our minds is through our ears. We need to hear positive sounds. You know, there's so many people now, people in the world, even Christians, people who call themselves Christians at least, and people who are Christians that they just don't know better, they like to listen to filth and smut and junk and destruction that comes across the airwaves, that comes through the TV, that comes out of their phones and comes, you know, their spirits are dwarfed. Their spirits are just shut down and compressed and can never grow because they're constantly listening to so much junk. Sometimes you got to just turn it off. I mean, the music in this generation, and I'm not just talking about rap music. You can find it everywhere. Country music, R&B. I mean, the lyrics, there's so much junk, so much negative stuff. And particularly that cussing rap music, that's, I believe, by far the worst, but it's certainly not the only. Television, some of the plot, some of the storylines, the scripts, the words that they put in those scripts that we allow to come into our mind so continually. You know, there was one particular TV series that I rather enjoyed, I was watching, and they just kept, and I particularly enjoyed this series. I enjoyed watching it. But they just keep on working all of these curse words. They kept working in the GD word where they take the Lord's name in vain. I thought, you know, whoever's writing that script, they don't have to keep writing that in there. I think they're doing it on purpose. Get us used to taking God's name in vain. And, you know, I liked the plots, and it was very entertaining and all that. But you know what? After so many times I had watched that show, one day I heard that, and I said, you know what? I've had enough. Right in the middle of an episode, I just hit that channel button. It works. It really does. You can change the channel. You really can. But I want to see how it ends. I don't care how it ends. It's not real anyway. It didn't really happen anyway. But I had to train my mind to do that. Everything in me was saying, well, maybe we can choose to hear positive sounds if we want to. We can choose what we listen to. What you listen to is very much like your thoughts. In fact, if you listen to something enough, it will become your thoughts, I promise. You hear something often enough, you can't help but hearing it when it's not playing anymore. How many of you ever do that? You be driving down the street, and all of a sudden you start hearing a song in your head, and the radio ain't even on. You ever done that? Deborah started singing this song today about that tree, and before she even say planted by the waters, I'm hearing it in my thoughts, planted by the waters. Before she ever got to that line about not being moved, I knew, I'm already thinking about how we're not going to be moved. Hallelujah. That's exciting. But see, I've heard it enough that it automatically comes to my thoughts. But how many of you know that if I keep putting junk in my ears long enough, I'll start hearing that too? I'll be driving down the road and I'll just hear the trigger word, and then I hear the whole rest of the song in my head. It becomes my thoughts. You hear stuff enough, it becomes your thoughts. Now remember, we're supposed to think good thoughts. If we're going to think good thoughts, we're going to have to start hearing some good sounds. Right? It's one of the reasons why music and poetry are so powerful. And if you don't think music is powerful, I want to tell you, you're missing something. Music is one of the most powerful ways. The devil works through music. I want to tell you, he got the idea from God because God works through music. The devil tries to mimic. He didn't create anything on his own, nothing. He never created anything. He tries to mimic and twist the things that God created for good. So, if hearing things affects our thoughts, let's hear some good things. I don't have to listen to that cuss and rap music. I can turn on some praise music. I can turn on some worship hymns. I can listen to some spoken word about positive things. I can listen to the psalms, poetry of good things. I can fill my mind and my thoughts and my ears with good things. It's hard. If you hear negative things, it begins to inhabit your mind. I call it ear poison. It's hard to hear negative things all the time and not have negative thoughts. I've got some people that, several people that just are constantly telling me, a friend of mine one time, and he's just telling me all the negative things that are going on, and you're following me around, just telling me all these negative things that's happening in his life, and he's upset with this person, he's upset with that, and he's on the phone, and he's hollering. I remember one day this person that I'm thinking of was on the phone, and it's just like he's hollering at somebody else about all the negative stuff, and finally I just said, buddy, hey, that's ear poison. Take your ear poison somewhere else. I don't want to drink it. I was being rude, but sometimes you have to do that. Look, don't poison my ears. If there's a reason you're telling me about all the negative stuff, then I want to listen if I can help. I want to be a good counselor, a good pastor. But sometimes people just spew it out because that's all that they've got spewing in. They don't even know any better. You got to say, hey, wait a minute. Let's flip that around. It's hard to be subjected to a lot of it and not be affected. But if you hear positive sounds, if you fill your ears with positive words, positive songs, positive music, positive things, then it'll lead to positive decisions. It just will. You can't help it. If you fill your ears with enough positive things, then what will happen is, and it can be very annoying for some people that don't want to hear it, but what will happen is when people are telling you their negative stuff, you just can't help it. Your mind, you're hearing the positive stuff. And it almost becomes like an argument because you just keep coming back with, well, but. Yep. Let me tell you about my mountain. Well, let me tell you about my God. Let me tell you about my problem. Well, let me tell you about my prayer. Let me tell you about my praise. We got examples of that in the Bible, of people hearing good things. Isaiah chapter 6, verse 8, he said, also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And then I said, here am I, Lord, send me. So Isaiah was in the habit of hearing good things. He was in the habit of hearing the Lord. He trained himself to listen for good things. By the way, if you've trained your ears to hear negative junk all the time, how are you going to hear the voice of the Lord when he whispers to you in that still small voice? Turn that radio off. Turn that junk off that you're... Isaiah trained himself to listen to good things. And then he made a good decision. He said, here am I, Lord, send me. Ezekiel, then the Spirit of the Lord lifted me up, and I heard behind me a great thunderous voice saying, blessed is the glory of the Lord from his place. I also heard the noise of the wings of the living creatures that touched one another, and the noise of the wheels behind them, and a great thunderous noise. So Ezekiel heard some positive sounds, made decisions based on them. John recorded perhaps more hearing than anyone, recorded more things about what he heard in Revelation. We need to get used to hearing good things. John had a revelation of the future. He said, after these things, I heard a loud voice of a great multitude in heaven saying, hallelujah! Salvation and glory and honor and power belong to the Lord our God. Revelation chapter 5, he said, I looked and I heard the voice of many angels around the throne, the living creatures and the elders, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing. And every creature which is in heaven and on the earth and under the sea, and such as are in the sea, and all that are in them, I heard saying, blessing and honor and glory and power be to him who sits on the throne and unto the Lamb forever and ever. Hallelujah. You know, we've got to listen to the good and not the bad. We've got to hear from the Lord and heed his word. You can choose to listen to positive things. Even in a world filled with negative voices and negative sounds, even if you must hear negative things, you can choose to listen for the positive things among them. For example, the news is filled with negative. There's all kinds of negative things in the news. I was listening to the news yesterday for a couple of hours with Deborah as we were discussing, we're just talking and sharing life, listening to the news there in the background and talking about it. And I want to tell you, there's some junk going on in the world right now. I mean to tell you, there is some real heavy stuff going on in the world. And so many people don't even realize it. We're just going about our business as if we didn't even know. And most people don't even know. Most people haven't read the Bible anymore. It's a shame. It's really a shame that so many people, most Christians here in America, have not read all the way through the Bible. Might have read all the way through 100 romance novels. Might have read all the way through, Harry Potter 6 times, but haven't read the Bible. But if you've read the Bible and you've really believed the Bible and you've paid attention to what you're reading and you see the things happening in the world, I want to tell you there's some junk going on in the world right now. I read the book of Revelation and I look around me and I see so many of the signs of the times of the end that are being fulfilled right before our eyes. I see so many of the things that Revelation says. I see nations and kingdoms coming together and doing the things that the Bible said. I see people and movements. I see so much. There's so much negative news that I hear. But even if you have to hear some negative stuff, you can listen for the good. And even if there isn't any good at all, you can still hear the good. Jesus told us how to do this when he was telling his disciples about what it would be like in the tribulation times and the end of the world. And he told them there's going to be some really negative stuff happen. There's going to be some really bad stuff happen. In Luke 21, he said, now when these things begin to happen, look up and lift your heads because your redemption draws near. So when I see and hear when I hear all the negative news, I can think about, how terrible it is, or I can think about, how close we are to Jesus. Jesus coming back. Oh, how I look forward to that day. Even so, Lord Jesus, come. He talks about those who love his appearing in his kingdom. So even when we hear negative things, we can find the good in it. We can say, well, wait a minute. God's in this, and he is in every situation. Hope that helps somebody today. Number 3, we need to see positive sights. Remember, if we want to think good thoughts, we got to begin to control what comes into our mind. One way is the ear gate. The other way is the eye gate. We need to see some positive sights. You know, some Christians, even people that call themselves Christians, even people that love Jesus, can get in a habit, it seems, of just looking for the bad in every situation, especially in people. It's easy to see the bad in people. By the way, you'll never meet anybody that you can't find something wrong with. I promise. If you don't believe me, just look in the mirror. Because we've all sinned and come short of the glory of God. The Bible says there's none righteous, no, not one. We've all turned aside. We've all gone out of the way like sheep that have turned aside. We've all been separated from God. We're lost apart from him. So there's nobody that you can't find some fault with. You can see negative in anyone if you're looking for it. You can see bad in circumstances. But sometimes people get in the habit of seeing only the faults. And by the way, I don't want to be foolish here. You need to keep your eyes open. Jesus said we need to be wise. Wise as serpents, but harmless as doves. Yeah, I need to keep both eyes open. I need to be aware of the dangers. But while I'm aware of the dangers, I can still see some positive stuff. I also need to be looking for the good in people. Sometimes you got to be looking for it in order to find it. You got to see good things. See good things. You know, gold mining, I was thinking about gold mining. I may get the numbers a little off here because it's not in my notes, but I'll be pretty close. But, you know, gold mining, in most of the gold mines in the world, there's like less than 1 part per million. I think it's 1 part per million. There's like 0.5 to 0.35 parts per million of gold in the rock that they're digging for. But as long as there's at least, I think it's 0.5 parts per million of gold in rock, they can mine it profitably. They can make a profit. They can bring in billions of dollars. Most of these big gold mines, they actually cost billions of dollars before they get it all set up and all the infrastructure and equipment that it takes and the manpower to mine this gold and get it up out of the ground. But they can still do that profitably, even if there's only like something like half a 0.5 or something parts per million of gold. I thought that was amazing. I thought that was fascinating. But then as I was reading on, I found this even more fascinating, was that in order to be visible to the naked eye, there has to be something like more than 1 part per million. I think it's more like 1.5 parts per million in order for a person to be able to see the gold with naked eye. And what that means is that most of the gold being mined in the world, you can't even see it if you're looking right at it. You can't even see it. Yet some people that know how to look for good things, that know how to look for the gold, they bring in billions and billions of dollars worth of equipment and infrastructure, and they're willing to move tons and tons and tons of rock in order to see that gold because they know it's there. And we can do the same thing with life and with people. There's good inside of every single person, every single one of us. You might have to get past a whole bunch of junk and rock and dirt and hardness, but it's worth it because there's gold in them there rocks. We can see good things if we're looking for it. We got to choose to look for it. I hope that's helping somebody. I hope maybe somebody online watching that and thinking about some people that you've been failing to see the positive things. And you've got to choose to see positive things. It's easy to see only the negative, only the faults, only the bad in our situations. It's easy to do. If we're not careful, that's all we'll do. In fact, if you've ever been disappointed, if you've ever been rejected, if you've ever been neglected or abandoned or abused or hurt, if you've ever suffered failure, if you've ever suffered loss, why, it's easy to see those things everywhere you look. Once I've heard enough, I can just put on my hurt-colored glasses. You've heard of people looking at the world with rose-colored glasses. I know a lot of people that look at the world with pain-colored glasses. And I don't want to discount the things that those folks have been through. Of course they've been through some stuff. Of course they've hurt. Of course they've had sorrow. Many of it is sorrow that I can't relate to personally. But he can. He can. And the way out of it isn't to keep on seeing your pain everywhere, but rather to see the good. Instead of seeing failure and loss, we've got to see Jesus. That's how you train yourself to see positive sights. David said that. Acts chapter 2 reminds us, David says concerning him, I saw the Lord always before my face. Do you see the Lord? Do you see the Lord when you get out of bed in the morning and you look at your life? Are you seeing the Lord there with you? Or do you see yourself all alone? And if you see yourself all alone, well, just stop. Go back and remember, he said, I am with you always, even to the end of the world. I will never leave you and forsake you. He's right there with you. Do you see the Lord? That was David's secret. That's how he got through. I want to tell you, he went through some junk too. He went through some real junk. His parents didn't treat him right. If you read it, started out when he was a little boy. They didn't have him come in to dinner. They didn't think he was worth even coming before the prophet. They brought everybody else in instead. So his parents didn't treat him right. He had to fight that giant, and instead of getting rewarded, he ended up with the king trying to kill him, his father-in-law trying to murder him for years in the wilderness. And then just so much junk happened to him. But he was the greatest of the examples of the kings of Israel, the followers of God. And he said, I see, this was his secret. He said, I see the Lord always before my face. So he could write things like, the Lord is my light and my salvation, of whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? He said, even if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. His rod and his staff, they comfort me. He just expected good because he saw the Lord always. Stephen, even when he was about to be stoned, he said, I see Jesus. He saw Jesus standing at the right hand of God, even as his enemies were coming on him. Do you see Jesus or just your circumstances? So many of us, it's easy to get in the habit of just seeing our circumstances. If you do that, you can't be the positive person that God created you to be. And God created you to be a positive person, a positive impact on your world, on your family, on your city, and even on yourself. You got to see Jesus above your circumstances. Isaiah said, I saw the Lord high and lifted up. Is the Lord high and lifted up above your circumstances? Above your problems and your pain? Now you may think it just happened that way for them without anything on their part. Maybe, David just wasn't looking and, he wasn't looking for the Lord, but it just, got put there. Maybe Stephen was trying to look at the stones, but Jesus got in the way. But I think they had a choice. I think they all had a choice. The Bible tells us to look in order to see these positive things. He is at my right hand, therefore I shall not be shaken. The Bible says we got to look. If you want to see positive things, you got to look. How do you see? You look. Hebrews chapter 12 verse 2 says, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising its shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. To be a positive person, One's got to look for the good and look to Jesus. That's how you do it. You look. And remember the context of that passage. We're told to look unto Jesus. Well, what's the context of that passage? That's Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2. He's just finished chapter 11, the heroes of faith. A lot of times people refer to chapter 11 of Hebrews as the hall of faith. He lists the stories of these great heroes of faith who by faith they built the ark. By faith they passed through the Red Sea. By faith they were translated. By faith they pleased God. But then he also reminds us that not only did they receive all these great miracles by faith, but there were some who were tortured and didn't receive great miracles. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 36 says this, and others had trial of cruel mocking and scourgings, yea, moreover of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, they were tempted, they were slain with the sword, they wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And to all of these he said, look unto Jesus. And to us he said, remember all of these and how they overcame their situations through faith by looking unto Jesus. You can do it too. Look unto Jesus. You want to see good sights? Look unto Jesus. Even in dire circumstances, we have a choice to live by faith, to think positive thoughts, to hear positive sounds, and to see positive sights. You see by looking, so look to Jesus. And then the last two that I have for, we need to speak positive words. First three had to do with what comes into our mind. Now, we're supposed to be a river. Jesus said, he that believeth in him should be like a river. Out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. So, part of a river has to do with what flows in. The other part has to do with what flows out. You don't want to be the one that stops up the flow of positivity, do you? You don't want to be the one that stops up the flow of good. If all you do is hear good stuff, but you never do anything good, you're still going to be a negative person. Sorry. So many Christians fall either on the one side or the other. I've met people who just don't do anything but good things, just constantly, and still have such a negative outlook because they hear bad things and they see bad things and they think. And I've seen some other people who just are constantly filling themselves up, just taking in everything they can, but they end up just like the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea, the Jordan River is just filled with all kinds of life and fish and stuff, and it just flows and it dumps into the Dead Sea. But the Dead Sea, it doesn't have any streams or rivers coming out of it. It just takes in. And they call it the Dead Sea because there's no life in it. We could be like that if all we do is let good stuff in, but we never let it out. So we need to speak positive words. If you're filling your mind with good things, if you've done the first three of these, some people only talk about evil things, bad things. They repeat the gossip that they heard down the street. They repeat the bad story about so-and-so. They repeat the negative news. Sometimes they're harsh and unkind and even take God's name in vain. If we want to be a positive person, we need to be a well of life, speaking good things. If you really want to see power in your life, I mean power. If you really want to see the power of God manifest in your life, start speaking positive things, positively, often, on purpose. Don't wait for something positive to accidentally come out of your mouth. If you look back on the day and you haven't just been a well of positive words, write a script for tomorrow. Write it down. Take some notes. Write down some things that you want to say that are positive. Carry a little cheat card in your pocket. Pull it out. Did I say this? Did I say that? Really? I've done that. So many people open their mouths to spew negative, bad things, and they're ignorant about the power of these words. Your words really do have power. The book of Psalms tells us we need to sing to him, sing psalms to him, talk of all his wondrous works. We need to sing. By the way, a little plug here. There's no better place to get started on that than right here in church on Sunday morning. You know, in the book of Acts, you see the early church sometimes, and not only that, but in the Gospels, Jesus and his disciples, they came together and they'd sing some hymns. Now, it doesn't say that Paul brought the people together and he got up on the stage and entertained them all with his great musical talent and abilities while they sat there and watched him in slumber. It says they got together and sung. I've never read in the Bible about the talent contest, the talent show. I didn't hear about in the Bible where people had to try out to see if they were good enough to sing in the choir. Well, I don't sing because my voice doesn't sound good. No, you don't sing because you don't want to sing. I'm sorry. I'm going to stop right there. I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes. Oh, maybe I am. But sometimes there's a great flow I think that God wants to do, but we're worried about what will they think if I start. I bust out singing a couple times and people laugh. I guess I carry a tune so poorly. Well, that's on them. Or maybe I just made them feel so good that they couldn't help but start chuckling a little bit. But anyway, just my little plug for the choir. We need to build a choir here at City of God Church. We need to bring all of our talent forward. I think sometimes people are afraid to because they think, well, I'm not talented enough. Well, I just can't find one single example in the New Testament of the Bible where people got there by their talent. We've got this star mentality in the American church where, you know, it's just a few people up here entertaining everybody or ministering to everybody, but it's the whole church. The worship team is the whole church. It's not just the people on the stage. People on the stage are trying to lead people into worship. But it won't happen if we don't all. Well, anyway, what were we talking about? We were talking about speaking positive things. Sing psalms to him. Talk of all his wondrous works. So we should talk positively, seeking to glorify God. We should proclaim his goodness, his grace, and his love. James tells us that if we can control our tongues, we can control the whole course of our life. By the way, put this little plug in before I get to the passage from James. You follow me around long enough, you might say, well, Pastor Billy, you didn't do that on You didn't do that last Wednesday, when you were talking about. I heard some, you seemed pretty down that day. Listen, the Word of God is the Word of God, whether every example that you know gets it perfect or not. I don't always get this right, but it's always right whether I get it right or not. I've had some days where at the end of the day, I'm thinking, I let my circumstance overcome me a little bit. I had a negative attitude that day. I've had a few days like that where I get to the end of the day. I can do two things. I can make excuses for it, or I can say, okay, I'm going to get that better tomorrow. Lord, help me to get that better tomorrow. It doesn't matter. I've seen some times over the years where I can remember one time in particular where I tell you, it seems like it must have gone on for a month or two. I just was getting a worse and a worse attitude. I showed up every day, do good things. But boy, I open my mouth and it's just negative Nancy, And if you was reflecting on, if you was around me, one of them, you might say, well, here he is talking about all this positive talk. Look, we're all people. We all fall short. But the word is true whether we all get it right or not. So when you find yourself deviating from the standard, you get back to it. I hope that makes sense to somebody. So we should talk positively. James tells us if we can control our tongues, we control the whole course of our lives. That's James chapter 3. Proverbs says, a man's belly shall be satisfied with the fruit of his mouth, and with the increase of his lips shall he be filled. Because death and life are in the power of the tongue. He actually went so far as to say that death and life are in the power of our tongue. What we say can really actually go so far as to increase the length of our life or the length of others' lives, and it can go far enough to shorten the length of our lives, the length of others' lives. Our words. Now the thing is, we read that passage, we tend to think of it as like a bolt of lightning. Death and life are in the power of a tongue. So I said something negative, and if a bolt of lightning doesn't come and destroy whoever I was talking about or whatever, well, then that wasn't true. But that's not what he said. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. It takes time sometimes for these things to be fulfilled. But if you consistently speak negative things, negative results are going to happen. And it really does ultimately cause people's lives to be shorter or longer. There's some people that because of their positive words, they recover, they overcome. It says, they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. And finally, we need to perform positive deeds. Not only do we need to think good thoughts, hear good sounds, see good sights, and speak positive things, but we also need to perform positive deeds. You know, the deeds of a lot of people, the things that they do, their actions are negative, selfishly motivated, dishonest, and displeasing to God. If we want to be a positive person, we need to do the opposite of that. The opposite of that would be to be selfless, to be honest, and to be pleasing to God in all those things that we do. And you know, it's easy to do. Some people say, well, you know, I mean, how could I remember all the commandments and all the things? You know, if we just purpose in our heart to live a life pleasing to God, you'll be amazed at just how much the Holy Spirit will help you do it. If we would just purpose in our heart to just think on good things and say, Lord, before we choose or settle on a course of action, say, Lord, you want me to go this way or that way, you would be amazed at how you would find him leading you and be pleased with the result. Doing positive things is so very easy if you purpose in your heart to do positive things and to not do the opposite, the negative things. And it has nothing to do with your circumstances, and it has everything to do with your choice. Doing good deeds, doing positive things, doing good things has nothing to do with my circumstances. You can treat people positively. You say, well, that's not the way they treated me. You know, the golden rule that Jesus gave us, he said, therefore, all things whatsoever that you wish men would do to you, you should do. All things whatsoever you would that men should do to you, do you even so to them. This is the law and the prophets. Jesus didn't say however people treat you is how you should treat them. Jesus said however you wish people treated you is how you should treat them. You wish people would treat you positively, with kindness, with joy. I like to be greeted with joy. How many of you like a nice greeting? Somebody greets you with a smile. How many of you say to someone, how you doing today? Say, well, I'll tell you what, I'm glad you asked. It's a lousy day and you're a... Ooh, sorry I asked. We've all been there. But our positive deeds are based on what we would like, not our circumstances. And by the way, you can be sure that if we do that, you can be sure that there'll be a harvest. It's not in vain when you do good deeds. Galatians chapter 6, God said, be not deceived. Through Paul, he said, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows, that shall he also reap. For he that sows to the flesh shall from the flesh reap corruption, but he that sows to the Spirit shall from the Spirit reap life everlasting. You don't have to worry about whether or not your positive deeds are going to have a positive reward. It's an absolute guarantee that they will. You're sowing seeds. And the Bible tells us that God is not unrighteous to forget that work, to forget your good deeds, your labor of love, which you've showed toward his name. God isn't unrighteous. He won't forget. It doesn't matter if the whole rest of the world forgets. If you do positive deeds, if you decide to be a positive person, well, nobody notices. Nobody even matters. Shoot, I came to church and sung, and there wasn't but 2 people there, and they weren't even singing. That doesn't matter. God sees. God sees. Your positive deeds cannot go unrewarded because God is not unrighteous. So it's easy to have a positive outlook if we choose to. Colossians says, whatever you do, Do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men. How do you choose to do positive deeds, even if you're in a place that's not so positive, even if you're in the middle of a crooked and perverse generation? Well, and that's what Paul said, by the way. He said that we should do these things even in the middle of a crooked and perverse generation. So he understood the world that we'd be in, but he said we can do it anyway. We can have this positive outlook and do positive things. How do you do that? Well, you do it as though you're doing it to the Lord and not to men. You want to feed somebody that's hungry? Feed the homeless, or come and take part in our food program? We've had some people take part, come and volunteer, and then especially back when we had a lot of kids, we might have had like 50, 60 kids eating here. And some people say, well, they're ungrateful. Maybe they seem that way to you, but that shouldn't determine your outlook, because the Bible says you should do that as if it was the Lord you was feeding, not men. Whatever you do, do it heartily as unto the Lord and not unto men. We must be honest, ready to lift up those who are down, ready to be witnesses for Christ. And finally, you can also attend positive places. This is the last one on my list, I think. If you want to be a positive person, that's what we're talking about, how to be a positive person. How to be a positive person. We gave a few practical steps. We need to think positive thoughts. We need to hear positive sounds. We need to see positive sights. We need to do positive deeds. Did I skip one? We need to attend positive places. The Bible tells us a companion of fools will suffer harm. It's not good. You can surround yourself with negative people all the time, and pretty soon you're going to be negative. It's true. You stay in quicksand long enough, you're going to sink. Psalm 1 says, blessed is the man that walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor sits in the seat, nor stands in the way of the sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. He said, blessed is the man who doesn't do those things. You got to get out of that negative pit if you want to have a positive outlook. Sometimes Christians hurt their influence in the world by going to the wrong places in search of entertainment, in search of the wrong type of companions. Like I said, a companion of fools suffers harm. There's so many negative places that we can find ourselves if we're not careful. And you'd be surprised just how easy it is to remove yourself once you decide you want to. Just how easy it is to remove yourself from negative places, from negative friends, from negative peers, negative family. I don't care if it's your own household, if it's your own brothers and sisters that are constantly negative and dragging you down. Hang out somewhere else. Find a different place. And do not be deceived. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul tells us, do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits. Remember how habits lead to our destiny. Instead, we should place ourselves in positive places and around positive people. And I want to tell you, there are very few better ways to do that than starting by being in a good Bible-believing church regularly, every Sunday, midweek, at the home groups and life groups. Come and not just, I want to tell you, the church ought to be the very first place we can learn to be positive people. We ought to come into a church, and when we get there, we ought to hear positive things. And when we look around, we ought to see positive sights. And we ought to be the people saying those positive things that other people hear. And we ought to be the people doing those positive things that other people see and experience us doing. We're all a family here together. Being in a good church regularly, we become a positive group that lifts up one another. All of us doing our part. Each member, the Bible talks about each member being fitly joined together, just like a body. Each little piece fits just right, the way it's supposed to, and that's the way it is here in our church. Regularly, attending a good church faithfully, you go with God and He will go with you. Bible says in Hebrews chapter 10, we should not forsake the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. David said, I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. So put these practical steps into practice in your life, and you'll be amazed at just how easy it is to become a positive person, a positive Christian person. In fact, I want to tell you, if you make these practical steps a habit in your life, you can't help but end up being a positive person. You'll look in the mirror. I want to tell you, it'll come to the point where just seeing yourself in the mirror will cause your spirit to get uplifted, because you'll be in such a habit of hearing positive things and seeing positive sights and speaking positive things. Why, you'll be the positive thing that charges your own self up. And if you're already a positive person, then keeping these steps in mind will help you increase your positivity and maintain your great attitude and the great benefits. Because I want to tell you, there's a reward. There's a reward for being the people that God calls us to be. If you're someone who's struggling with negative attitude, maybe you're struggling with depression, maybe you're struggling with anger, sadness, hurtful memories. My goodness, we've all got some of that, but some people really struggle and hurt. Well, I want to tell you, these steps will be truly transformative for you if you'll just, 1, think positive thoughts. 2, hear positive sounds. 3, see positive sights. 4, do positive deeds. And 5, go to positive places. Surround yourself. Be in positive places. And you'll be a positive Christian in the midst of this crooked and perverse generation, among whom you will find yourself shining as lights in the world.